It was 3:41 a.m. Kosis was standing over the body, or should I say the lifeless body of a man. He said his name was Nico. She had done it again. She had killed another man. But all that didn't matter though. It was 3:41 a.m. It was almost daybreak. So she had to dispose of the body. And she had to do it quickly. At first, she wanted to bury Nico in her tent because she liked him and it was kind of cute. But she decided against it. She was just going to bury him in the ice wall where she had buried the 24 other men that she had killed. If she was going to make it to the ice wall before daybreak though, she had to get going. So she rushed and she grabbed a wooden stretcher that she nicknamed the ambulance. She nicknamed the wooden stretcher the ambulance because it was the stretcher she used to transport the lifeless bodies of the men she killed. She gently lowered Nico's body on the ambulance. At first, she felt very guilty. But then she quickly remembered that this was what men did. This was what men did to women. This was what men did to women like her. Billions of women had died in the hands of men. And they didn't get any justice. Or so she had read. Again, she quickly snapped back into reality. The day was breaking quickly. And she had to get going. So she strapped the rope to the ambulance and proceeded to drag Nico's lifeless body through the thick snow and the dark night towards the ice wall. As she approached the ice wall, she stopped for a second to take in the beauty, to take in the sheer magnificence of the ice wall. It was 605 feet tall, and it seemed to stretch on forever. She was not intimidated one bit by it because it was her best friend. She considered the ice wall her best friend. It housed all her secrets, and it also shared some of its own with her. Again, she quickly remembered that none of this mattered. The only thing that mattered was disposing of the body before day broke. So she started chiseling. She started chiseling the ice wall. At first, she thought she was lucky because it was so soft. The ice was so soft. And then that's when another thought hit her. Maybe the ice was not soft because she was lucky. Maybe the ice was soft because the ice age was coming to an end. The great ice age was coming to an end. You see, the earth had seasons. There was summer, there was winter, there was fall, there was spring. But the sun also had seasons. It had two seasons. It had the warm season and it had the cold season. The warm season lasted for 35,000 years and there was a cold season. But the problem with the cold season was that it seems to last forever. Humanity was stuck with the sun. Humanity was stuck with this sun that was stingy with its warmth. Humanity was stuck with a sun that didn't want to shine. Humanity was stuck with a cold-hearted sun. All the animals were dead. Only the trees that could survive the cold embrace of the winter remained. Humanity was lucky though. Some insects survived. This was all humanity had to eat. Insects, and more insects. I mean, they had honey though, but their diet was still mostly insects. Once again, none of this mattered. The only thing that matters was that she had to put away the body. So she carved into the wall even quicker. And before she could say Jack Robinson, she had successfully created a cavity in the wall. And she placed Nico's body in the war. Once again, she felt very guilty. He hadn't done anything to deserve this. In fact, none of them had done anything to deserve this. This was not his fault. And this was not her fault either. This was all the fault of the wall. This was the fault of the ice wall. You see, she used to play at the ice wall when she was a kid. It was her favorite sport in the village. She used to dig random spots in the wall. Sometimes she would find this fidget spinner. Sometimes she would find a toy. Other times she would find a book. But she seemed to always find something. The ice wall would never let her go without giving her a gift. If she had a best friend, it definitely had to be the ice wall. It was the gift that just kept on giving. In fact, she had once found a phone in the ice wall. At first, when she picked it up, it didn't work. So she took it home, placed it close to the fire, and then after 2 days, it turned on. It was a phone. The phone was from the year 2024. 2024, that was 105 years ago. 5 years before the Great Icing began. The ice wall had perfectly preserved the phone. The battery was frozen in place. It worked like a charm. The battery percentage was at 87%. Apparently, the phone belonged to a girl called Sally. She lived in a place called New York. It had a lot of stuff on it. It had a lot of photos, loads of videos, all sorts of stuff. Sally's life was amazing. She ate meat. She had 2 pets, a cat and a dog. Her favorite food was this thing with red dots all over around it. It was called pizza. She ate it nearly every day. She had friends. In the videos, Sally and her friends would go to this place called the club, and they would dance and dance and dance. They had plenty of alcohol to drink, and in the morning, they would all go to this place called the gym. Sally's life was amazing. She seems to have everything. She even had friends that did not eat meat. They called themselves vegans. Kosis was technically also a vegan, not because she wanted to, but because everybody that lived within the ice wall had never tasted meat. All they had to eat was insects. The ice age had killed all the animals, and it was also killing Sally's phone. The battery percentage had dropped to 10%. There was a lot of photos to look at, tons of video to watch. Kosis had barely gone through 4% of them. She had barely scratched the surface. She was very curious. She had seen what Sally's life was like, but she wanted to see how it ended. What was she doing? What was she doing on the day that the tsunami hit the earth? September 29th, 2029. It was a tsunami that destroyed everything. It was the waters of the tsunami that eventually froze in place and became the ice wall. The ice wall that was her best friend, but also the ice wall that imprisoned her, imprisoned all of them. The battery of the phone was at 4% now. The ice was killing it softly. That was Sally's favorite song, or at least that's what she wrote in her diary. She also wrote in the diary about how she was something called a sex worker. That didn't make any sense to Kosis at the time. But whatever it was, she wanted to be that when she grew up. According to the journal on the phone, Sally's life was very fun. She didn't live in a house. She lived in a place called a brothel. She lived in a brothel with some of her friends. Men would come to visit Sally at the brothel. They would give Sally this thing called money. And in exchange, Sally would offer them sex. Money? What was that? Oh, maybe it's the equivalent of honey. It was something people used to exchange for goods and services. In Kosis village, the only thing they exchanged was honey. If you needed something, you would offer honey in exchange for it. Everybody had a beehive. Everybody. So maybe this money thing was like honey. Something valuable you could exchange for anything you wanted. Anyways, Sally had plenty of it. She kept all her money in something called a bank. The men couldn't stop giving it to her. They gave her as much as she wanted. But even though she had a lot of money, from her journal, she was not very happy. Not because she didn't like the money, not because she didn't like what she did, but she seemed to be afraid. She seemed to be afraid of the very source of her money. She was afraid of the men. She was afraid that one day they would kill her. Sally has written in her diary that her friend Sarah had died in the brothel a year before. It was one of these men that gave them money that killed her. She reported it to some people called the police, but they didn't do anything about it because, well, Sally was a sex worker. Sally expressed fears that she would one day end up like her friend, Sarah. She was very, very afraid. So she kept recordings of every interaction she had with the men on her phone. Every single one. She filmed it. Her phone was filled with it. There were videos of her being happy, but most of the videos of her was her with these men. She was always afraid of them. Again, the cold had dropped the battery percentage to 1%. The phone was going to die anytime now. Kosi shrugged. She had to see where all this ended. So she quit the journal app and started looking at the photos again. She scrolled down to one last video, and then she played it. It was the end. It wasn't just the end of the videos, it was also the end of the life of Sally. What she feared mood came upon her. The video showed a man, one of the men that had come to the brothel. He gave her plenty of money, but when he was leaving, he pushed her on the bed and strangled her to death in front of the camera. The camera saw it all. It saw everything. As Sally was closing her eyes, the phone was also dimming its light. The cold hands of death had snatched Sally, and it has also snatched the life of the battery. Both of them were snuffed out. Kosis was mad. She was in pain. Sally didn't even get to see the great tsunami. One of these men took her life, and she bet she would not get any justice because her friend Sarah didn't get any herself. So Kosis vowed all these men were going to pay for it. She was going to get Sally. She was going to get justice for Sally. So it wasn't about Nico. It wasn't about any of the 24 men that she had put in the ice wall. It was about Sally. Sally needed to get justice. Sarah needed to get also. And she was done this time. She had done it. 12 men for Sarah, 12 men for Sally. They had finally gotten their justice. She was done with this. She liked Nico though. He seemed like a very decent guy. But hey, Sally needed to be avenged. Sarah too. At this point, it was almost daybreak. So she pushed the ice slab that she had excavated from the ice wall. She pushed it into the cavity and she sealed Nico's body. She sealed him forever with the ice wall. It was there now. He could not escape. He wasn't going anywhere. She proceeded to return to the village. She needed to tend to her bees. They must be very hungry. Since there was no sunlight, there was no nectar to give the bees. They had adapted to drinking tree sap. So Sally needed to go into the woods and extract the tree sap, the frozen tree sap, defreeze it, and then feed it to her bees in the beehive. It was what she did every morning. It was her daily chore. It was her own equivalent of going to the gym. She wasn't very different from Sally, was she? She was a sex worker. She also went to the gym. And she also had plenty of honey. Sally had plenty of money. She also had plenty of money. She chuckled to herself. Her chuckle was interrupted though by a man who was holding a torch. He asked her where she was coming from. Also, he asked her if she had seen Nico. Somebody had gone missing again from the village. It was Nico. This was the 24th appearance in the last 6 months. 24 men had gone missing in a space of 6 months. Where were they going? The ice wall was very thick. It was impenetrable. It was 600 feet tall. There was no way they could have climbed it. Where were they disappearing to? What was happening? The man looked very worried. He asked Sally if he had seen Nico. Sally shook her head. She had never even heard the name before. The village had a population of 7,000. So, one Nico out of 7,000 people. No. She had never heard his name before. The man put his head down. It was very sad. Again, another man had gone missing. What was happening to them? He asked if Sally was free in the evening. He was going to stop by at the place. He was going to stop by for some sex. He said this time he would give her 3 jars of honey. 3 jars of honey that he had harvested. Sally was like, no, that she was not working today. So he said, okay. Sally was very popular in the village. Everybody seemed to like her. She was very popular with the men because she was a sex worker. But she was also very popular with the women and the children because she seems to know everything. She seems to help everybody. If they had a sickness, she somehow knew how to solve it. How did she know how to do these things? Nobody knew. But she was very knowledgeable about a lot of things. She seemed to also have a lot of knowledge about the past. She knew about everything. The history of the ice wall, the history of the sun. She knew everything. How did she know these things? Nobody knew. Nobody knew how she knew it. So they called her the angel because she had a kind heart and she was also very smart. She was as smart as an angel. Okay, so when Kosis got back to her tent, she realized that she had forgotten something. She had forgotten the ambulance. She had left it at the ice wall. God, she had to go back to get it. She had to go back to get it now. It had some blood stains on it. Also, Sally's revenge was not complete. Her cell phone was still in her tent. She had meant to bury the cell phone with Nico so that they could both rest in peace. She had to go back. She had to go back to the ice wall. So she hurried back. She took the cell phone in her hand and she hurried back. She hurried back to the ice wall. As she approached the ice wall, she could see the ambulance lying lifelessly beside the ice wall. All she had to do was just grab it, and she would be on her way back home. Oh, and she had to open the tomb again and throw in the phone. That wouldn't be a problem, she thought to herself. She proceeded to slide the ice slab that she placed over the tomb. She slid it open a little bit and she threw the phone inside. And then she proceeded to close it. And that's when she heard steps. She was not alone. She had actually been followed. She was being followed by who though? Who was following her? It was the man that she had seen earlier, the one that was looking for Nico. She could feel his warm breath breathing down her neck. He seemed to be very angry. He seemed to be very, very, very angry. Okay, so this is like, I'm going to do this in 2 parts. Part 1 and then part 2. So this is part 1 because part 2 is maybe tomorrow. I'll release part 2 tomorrow. So this is part 1. I'll try to put it out and then part 2 is tomorrow. Yeah. Okay, just a quick note. So this story is actually the story of, it's a bunch of stories from the Old Testament actually. So Kosis is the Moses, right? So there's this guy in the Bible, there's this prophet in the Bible, his name is Moses. He killed an Egyptian and then he ran away. But he ended up leading his people out of Egypt, right? So a twisted version of that is Kosis, right? But unlike Moses that killed only one person, Kosis is like a serial killer, right? So Kosis is based off Moses, right? The ice wall is based off the wall of Jericho. But again, it's twisted. Everything is twisted. There's this futuristic twist to it. This apocalyptic futuristic twist to it. The sun went away. The sun entered a season called the... I explained it in the story a little bit. So the sun has the earth has seasons summer, winter, all these really nice seasons. But seasons on earth last for 3 or 4 months, right? So apparently the sun in this story also has seasons. But one season, it has 2 seasons. The hot season and the cold season. The hot season lasts for 35,000 years. So all of human civilization has been in the hot season, So imagine if winter lasted for 200 years, right? Or summer lasted for 200 years. It means that if somebody was born in that it means that everybody in that generation, they will only know winter, they will only know summer. They won't even know that the sun there was something called summer. If they were born during the summer, and if they were born during the winter, they wouldn't know that there was anything called summer, because their whole life, their whole experience of the sun would be of that of on Earth would just be that season. So that's what happened in this story. Everybody that lived from the beginning of the Earth to 2029 lived in the warm season. The warm season is the season of the sun where you have summer, winter, autumn, spring, right? Fall, all these really nice seasons, right? And then the sun entered another phase, another season, which is cold season. Now that cold season started with something called the tsunami, right? So like a tsunami happened and it froze everywhere in the world essentially. It's flooded everywhere in the world essentially, and then it froze. And then because there was no sun in the sky, right? It froze, and then that tsunami froze essentially, and then it froze into it's what eventually became the ice wall, right? So this story is centered in New York. We don't know it yet, but I'll still talk in part 2. I'll talk about it. This story is like it's centered in New York, right? Cosis and a village, they are in Plum Island. There's an island in New York called Plum Island. So the ice wall is a tsunami that was about to flood Plum Island, and then it froze in place. Do you know all these like videos on TikTok where you throw, it's so cold that you throw ice inside you throw hot water from a cup, you throw it inside the air, and then it freezes, it turns into vapor, right? Okay, cool. So it was something like that happened. Plum Island was supposed to get flooded with that tsunami, right? And then the sun just went down, boom. So everything just froze in place. So it became an ice wall, right? So all the debris that the water had been carrying, all the cell phones, all the cars, all the laptops, everything, all those things were like frozen inside that ice wall. So that's what formed the ice wall, essentially. So that's the story of the ice wall. And then all the animals that died, Cosis and our people, the only thing they've ever ate was like, they've never tasted meat. They are just eating insects, up and down. Essentially, that's the story. But the part 2 is, I don't want to give too much away, but the part 2 is really, really nice. It's actually, the part 1, if you think part 1 is like, it's not nice at all, trust me. Like, part 2 is like sick, right? But the thing to remember here is that this is Plum Island, which means New York is like a few meters away from here. It's not very far. So I'm going to get to New York in part 2, but yeah. Part 1, the name of the story is called Supercat. Why is it called Supercat? Like, why is it called Supercat? Well, you find out in part 2. I didn't want to rush it. I still kind of rushed it out because, like, again, I want to get back to work, but I don't know. I'll try to part it as much as I can because there's a part of me that doesn't want to rush this one. Yeah, so that's it. So after this one, I'll redo that Kafanchan story. I'll tell it properly. I'll not rush it. I'll part it to part 1, part 2, and part 3. So part 2 is coming up. Grab your copy now. That's like a Nollywood reference, by the way.